From New York, Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning, Laura Stiles, Rosenberg, and on the show, Chirlane McCray and the Deputy Mayor, Phil Thompson. Scoot into the mic, Phil.
All right.
Can we call you Phil or we call you Deputy
Phil's
Mayor? We
good.
call you Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Phil's good.
These things, listen, I'll be honest. Many politicians come on the show.
No,
and
Ebro, the proper name, and he told me beforehand he wants to be called this every time. Mr. Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson. Every time you address him.
No.
It just feels good.
Just Phil.
Man of the people.
That's it.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Chirlane, you've been on the show several times, and we've done a lot of great work, and you've been doing a lot of great work, and thank you for coming up, dealing with mental health here in New York City.
That's right.
And, you know, with the amount of things taking place in New York City all the time, which are just regular everyday life, right? Mm-hmm. The cost of living, the traffic, the potholes, the noise, the this, the that, the stress of everyday life. Obviously, we have some unaddressed mental health things going on, besides even just things that people are born with and dealing with in their own families and abuse and all of these things. You line them up. But you guys are doing some amazing things with this Brothers Thrive program that recently just launched. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, we are working in partnership with 6 of the leading Black male-led service organizations. And I'm going to tell you who they are.
Yes.
Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Phi Beta Sigma, Iota Phi Theta, and 100 Black men.
Yes.
And we're working with all of them to get...
I wanted, not to cut you off, I wanted to make each little, you know how the frats have the noise and the sounds. I wanted to do each one, but I didn't want to screw it up. So anybody out there watching, when she shouts your frat, do your noise.
Do you? Yes. When we were at the press conference, they did their noises.
They got it popping.
All that. It was magnificent to have all those brothers standing together saying, we're going to work together. They've all, individually, all those organizations do health and wellness programs.
Yes.
But to bring them together and say, we're gonna address this collectively, because we know that we have so much more power standing together, working together. It was such an amazing moment. I was amazed.
Yeah, it's amazing how much work is going on. And on the ground and in smaller communities and organizations, right? That when you get everybody in one place and on one page, how that feels, right? Because, oftentimes with the amount of information we're inundated with every day of negativity.
That's right.
And problems that need to be addressed, right? It kind of it gives you hope when everybody's in a room making eye contact on one page. Now, Mr. Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, man of the people.
That's how you address this man.
I even gave him another man.
I like that.
Talk to us about Brothers Thrive and working with Chirlane to bring this together.
Well, it's really great, and I think this is such a need everywhere. That finally, Chirlane stepped up and said, "Let's just do something about it." I think it's great and it's profound. Growing up as an African American male, I have 3 boys, 25, 23, 21. I grew up with a bunch of close cousins who were like brothers to me. I believe all of us, dealing with the stresses of day-to-day life. Growing up is hard enough, but when you don't have any money, when you're not sure where you can live,
when
you are black, my cousin, I grew up in Philadelphia. My cousin once was walking out of a club, and the Philadelphia police let German Shepherds go with him, and he was bitten 25 times. He had 25 dog bites. And, it raises your stress level.
That's trauma.
It's trauma. And those things happen over and over again. There was an article published that said, if you experience 4 traumatic events before you're 18, that really affects you long-term, your mental health, your physical health. I counted way above 4.
Yeah.
And I think a whole lot of young men, African-American men, Latino men, other men, are dealing with these stresses all the time. So finally, to have, some real attention to this issue, some training so folks can actually intervene. I believe all of us go through periods, just like you get physically sick, all of us go through periods where we're mentally stressed out and we get close to the edge.
Well, and it's funny we're having this conversation today, and not funny, haha, but funny, interesting, because somebody that I consider a friend in this business, Kanye West, who has dealt with some personal issues, and we're watching. Some people speculate he's dealing with something right now. Others say, look, this is who he is and who he wants to be, and he's being happy, whatever it is. But figuring out your own identity in this current landscape of political stress and our country transitioning culturally and dealing with things that we thought were, well, I didn't think, but some people thought were sufficiently dealt with and addressed, and others are like, no, we haven't dealt with it enough. And then you have people who don't want to deal with it. And then you have people calling you a whiner. And then you have some people saying you're playing a victim role and don't be a victim, be a victor. And you're having all these things where if you're not supported by a great community that has clearly helped you identify who you are in this greater American society and world, and if you're not, secure within yourself, you could find yourself really confused, traumatized, afraid, and all of these things where now, a lot of people don't think that this is mental health, but it is, because those stress levels rise, right? And those, that fear of how to identify yourself. A lot of people aren't ready to deal with that stuff.
Well, I would just say I think Obama freaked a lot of people out.
On the other side.
People weren't ready on the other side for that, and it's emblematic of what's happening in the country. We will soon have no majority. There won't be a white majority, a black majority, a Latino majority. There will be no majority. And folks who are used to being in positions of power and their word is the word and so forth feel very threatened, and then they feel like they need to go on the attack. I think that's what's happening with the president of this country. And so those of us who are experiencing the attack, I think we have to put it in perspective and prepare ourselves to actually be leaders. And I see Thrive as part of that too. It's like, just don't react when someone throws a blow at you. Step back and think strategically and work together to say, you know what, we're going to help them through this transition.
And that help you're talking about through Brothers Thrive. Mental Health First Aid is an 8-hour course where participants are certified in recognizing the signs of mental health challenges.
That's right.
That's what the program is doing, right? Taking 10,000 New York black men in mental health first aid training.
That's right. They're going to do that so they learn to identify, recognize the signs of illness, also know how to respond and how to get people to higher levels of care if necessary. Learn how to listen without judgment. All of these are skills we don't grow up learning, right? We know what to do if somebody's bleeding.
Right.
But
sometimes,
right? Well, most of us have
we know how to dial 911. We know how to panic.
Yeah,
we know how to
get a Band-Aid, apply pressure.
Right.
We have some basics, but we don't have a language for mental illness and addiction. We just don't. We don't have the appropriate responses. And stigma plays a huge role in this. We don't even want to talk about it.
Well, and some of it too, Laura, in your personal life with your dad, and you've talked about it on the show. Rosenberg, you've openly talked about your dad's depression on the show as well. I've talked about my mom's depression, and we've talked about ways that they have dealt with it or not dealt with it, or my own father and dealing with his own trauma of prison and these things, right, and abuse. We've talked about all this stuff. I think, some people, when they're angry and hurt, right, confused and scared, and these things that are normal things that can happen to anyone, they don't know the effects on their emotions, and then the long-term effects, right?
Hurt people hurt other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cycle continues.
And the cycle continues.
Exactly.
So I kind of think that part of this is understanding that when you hear mental health, it's not just, somebody who's on the corner screaming at the sky talking to themselves.
No, absolutely.
That's right.
And also
That's
the lack
right.
of communication that happens, like, for instance, like with a father, it's like his abuse is a reflection of maybe something that he went through. And now he's passing it on to his son, and his son feels like he can't communicate properly, or, he can't identify that it is a mental health issue to allow him to understand, his father's actions. But I think it's really important because I know, with me working with kids, a lot of people don't realize the amount of stress that happens, especially in our inner city kids who, grew up in neighborhoods where there's gunshots and, you know, there's people, there's domestic violence, and they have to go to school and act like everything is okay.
A lot of my friends, you know, never saw age 50. You know, they started just because of the things you were talking about. They started self-medicating, you know.
Alcohol, weed, heroin,
all
cocaine.
of it, you know, crack, all of it,
yeah.
right? And their kids, you know, are growing up, you know, with that experience.
Now, and I want to stop you right there because that conversation doesn't, I don't think black men over 45 and 50, I don't know, have been given a platform, a public platform to, you know, because I heard that from my dad, right? When my dad got diabetes and was diagnosed with diabetes around his like 60, 61 years old. And if you know black men that are over 60 years old, they will openly talk to you about never preparing to live at that age and not even knowing the thought of being 60 years old was never like financially, health-wise, you know, never thought about it. And then you have the reality that there's a lot of black men who have just, because of how the communities have been, I guess, framed, set up for failure, inundated with illegal things, courtesy of, you know, trafficking and, you know, other laws that allowed it to flood black communities, then joblessness and depression and all these other layers in the black community, black men who literally have lost all of their friends and are looking around like, I'm here, I'm kind of like the last man standing. The trauma of that.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We're never meant to survive. Black men were never meant to, they're a threat, seen as a threat to society. There's a lot of deep suffering, the violence, the separation from the family, all of this stuff. We can't ignore that.
The emasculation.
Emasculation,
Right, like
yes.
that thing too. Like, you know, I remember my father once told me, he was like, you know, when I walk out of the house every day, I feel like I'm not a man. The way people look at me, the way the police talk to me, like I feel like I'm not even a man. Like I don't have any ability to stand up for myself.
Which is funny because, again, not haha funny, because it's rooted in fear of the hyper masculinity of the black man that was sort of created as well. So, right, so on one side, it's sort of like you had a population of people that were like, oh my God, they're so strong and masculine. And you know what you are is you're nothing. You're absolutely nothing. That was,
well, I'm afraid of you. I'm
afraid of you. So now I say you're nothing when really it's just like, well, I'm actually just like you, but this whole thing has been created, right?
My wife's great uncle was a photographer, and I keep a picture he took, very light skin. And I took a picture he took of a lynching, and I keep it in my study. You know, and a bunch of people just gathered around looking at the lynching. Speaking to the dynamic that you're talking about, black men have to be strong because of all the things that are we've been talking about. But strength doesn't mean stepping on women. It doesn't mean stepping on other black men. It doesn't mean, you know, being homophobic. I think we have to talk about different ways of being strong, you know, because none of that actually makes us strong.
Well, and vulnerability also is a big part of strength.
Yep.
And that's been
right.
really hard for people to do.
Very hard. But I just want to give you one data point. I haven't seen the most recent data, but 15 years ago for black men in central Harlem, their mortality, their average lifespan was 47.
Oh my God, that's insane.
And that's all these things you're talking about.
47?
I don't know what it is now.
And,
but it was,
by the way, and that's post crack, right? Because Harlem, if you know Harlemites and people who have lived in Harlem, like, you know, my daughter's grandmother who have lived in Harlem for 45 years, right? Like literally saw the drugs come in, saw people die, saw buildings fall apart. Harlem, like this great black institutional neighborhood that represented everything great about being black in America. You literally looked around and was like, oh shit. Like people walking the streets just, you know, if you lived in Harlem in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you lived in Harlem from the 60s to the 80s, you saw something that was like out of The Walking Dead.
Right.
It's amazing too because in some ways Harlem has encapsulated so much of the black experience in America. You have all this culture, right? The soul that we were always told about, that it really exists and sort of sets the tone for pop culture generally. All of it's right there. And then you have this mini bourgeois that exists that's there as well, right? But when you really look at the numbers, it's such a small percentage of what Harlem really is when you look around, which is mostly people struggling, right?
That's right.
And you can see it all right there. So when you hear those numbers, it's fascinating to think about.
Well, and we've talked a lot this week too about, and all the time about, as a country not wanting to deal with this pain, right? Like the fact that you know, Chirlane and the deputy mayor of the city are getting together to, you know, do something for black men to support one another. Our country isn't even dealing with the mental health issues of the total population.
That's right. That's
right. Like, think about the total population of America and the things that has happened to people, whether it be amongst each other, from the government, things that were legal, right? Things that are now illegal, you know, things like black flight, an entire population of people leaving a region to go find work. Like, that's happened like, there are people living now that did that. You know what I mean? Like, that's a real thing. And these, you know, and then that's even before you get to Native Americans or Japanese people being put in camps on the West Coast and around the country, or the way Muslim people are being treated right now, or, you know, immigrants, you know, if you're Mexican or Central American, or, you know, all, like, we do not address these things.
I think as black men, one of the things we have to learn how to do is also reach out to poor white folks and white veterans. I just saw on TV yesterday a veteran saying some veterans have committed suicide in the parking lots of VA hospitals, you know? And I think we have to be big enough to reach out, you know, and open up. We can't wait for them to figure out, like, how to heal. And when it comes to black men, it's actually been black women who've actually been the ones who've raised the issue about black men.
Yes.
We haven't done it for
Because
ourselves.
they love us.
Chirlane McCray is the one who convened
Yes.
all of the fraternities to say, come on, let's do something.
Well, black women been saving us all for a long time.
It's true.
Now it's saving everybody, and there's but I hear what you're saying, Deputy Mayor, because there's power in numbers, right? And so if we could get, I mean, man, the government right now nationally doesn't feel like they're even worried about the mental health of white people. So getting them to appreciate the mental health issues of black people is a whole nother issue. So if you can team up, right, maybe there's some power in getting people to understand there are lots of people who need help. And it's interesting you mentioned veterans, because people in the inner cities, they're like veterans, they're victims of trauma.
They're victims of
violence.
That's
war,
what it
of
is.
violence. They
That's
live in
what
war
it is.
zones.
That's right,
That's what
and they are not getting the support that they need. I think it's so important that we're having this discussion today, and Brothers Thrive. They're going to have these conversations all over the city in every borough. They're going to have. I think
It's called I Hear You, Brother.
Yes, I Hear You, Brother. Conversations, which is so important to get it out, right? Talk to one another.
Being heard,
but raise the issues that don't get talked about. We have to do it for ourselves. There is no coordinated mental health system in this country or in our neighborhoods, nowhere. So if we don't do it, who's going to do it?
Now, Chirlane, I'd love to, for maybe people who are just getting to this video, right? Maybe they haven't seen our other conversations. This started with Thrive NYC, right?
Yeah, 2 years ago, in 2015, we launched Thrive. We asked as a answer to what's not happening anywhere. The fact that we have no coordinated mental health system, the fact that our services aren't delivered in the way we need them to be delivered in our neighborhoods where people live, learn, work, go to school. Thrive is a response to all of that. And we took a lot of time talking to people, like, what do you need? What do you need to see? We took a year just talking with people before we launched.
How do people get involved if you want to be one of the 10,000 New Yorkers trained in mental health first aid? How would I sign up for that?
All you got to do is go to the website nyc.gov/thrive, and there's a button that you can click on. You can also, if you want to get information or help, you can call 1-888-NYC-WELL. Get information from there as well.
And also, before I let you guys go, we've also been dealing with trying to not allow partisan politics to become a part of the conversation around these things like mental health and conversations around race and conversations around just pain and respecting cultural issues that, black, I get really sensitive when, people want to tell black people how to express their pain over slavery. And it's like one of the most disrespectful things I think that happens in this country too frequently. And only because, and the reason I feel it's super disrespectful is because, my mother's Jewish, right? So obviously I participated in Passover Seders with my bro Rosenberg at his home, where Jews get together and they talk about slavery, right? And everyone's okay, right? In our country with that concept, because it didn't happen here. It happened somewhere else, right? Holocaust didn't happen here, happened somewhere else. So those ideas and conversations are a safe ground where everybody's okay because, the great America didn't do those things. We're great. But when it comes to the things and the crimes that were committed here, now black folks, we can't have our space to express. Right? And yes, we have our museum in D.C. now, and they just opened up another museum in Alabama where they, commemorated and named over 300 people who were lynched. And, because we don't know those people, we don't know those names, right? And that was in Montgomery, Alabama. And these things are happening, but the blowback where it's okay, because you could not find a person that would be okay telling Jewish people not to talk about the Holocaust. That's not a thing. There are people who try it, and they fail, right? And I would love to see a tone set at some point, right? Where, the disrespect given towards black people and how we're trying to recover from what happened to our ancestors in this country, while also doing other great things, right? Because there's black people doing great things without playing the victim and we can sit around and talk about our pain and, unpack how that feels while we also do other things that are great and progressive. Like we can multitask, and it's super offensive. And, I would just love to see, that conversation become more mainstream on behalf of the people who still feel that pain.
My grandfather cried only twice that I ever saw. Once is when my grandmother died, and the other time is when I asked him to tell me what he knew about slavery. And he told me what his Uncle Jerry told him about North Carolina. And he told me the names of family members who were raped they would take them 20 feet away and rape, and what the humiliation was, for everybody, and what that felt like. And he just broke down crying. He was a strong man, he just broke down crying. I feel like these issues are still too hot here. I don't know any black people who don't have an inner rage. I think one of the reasons why Obama got to be president is because he didn't have slavery in his background. Kenyan. Most black folks are either too angry or too subservient, really trying to struggle and how to deal with this stuff. How to balance it. And there's no space for that. And it underlies all of this that we're still struggling with. We're still trying to engage and figure out how to deal with. You're so right.
That was such a pointed thing about Obama that's so interesting. He's able to feel the way his constituents feel, but his relating to slavery is the same way in some ways he's able to go to a white town that's dealt with something and relate to them. Right. He's just great at relating to people, but it's not the same inner pain because it wasn't in his family. That's deep.
Look, it was a great conversation. Thank you guys. It's nyc.gov/thrive.
That's right.
Dealing with mental health.
Thrive NYC, yeah.
Thank you guys for
Check
your time
it out.
today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.